speak in English. I'll try to speak pretty clearly since I know the native language of Ukraine is not English. So I appreciate all of you listening to me in a foreign language, although there may be a few native English speakers in the room. I've been here for a week with a group of MIT students. Very exciting. It's the first time in Ukraine for all of them. We're here to learn about the post-industrial spaces along the Podil waterfront and in Podil and in Ukraine in general. And tomorrow we begin a very exciting trip for 4 days, taking the overnight trains across Ukraine to 3 different cities. We begin at 6:45 tomorrow morning. So it's a nice opportunity to end my days in Kiev with a lecture to you about my new book, The Largest Art. This is a book about urban design. So the book is intended for people who are interested in the design of cities. This is for architects, landscape architects, urban planners, urban citizens, politicians, developers, whoever's interested in the way we design cities. And the basic thing that I'm trying to say in my book is that I think the way we're designing cities is not the only way that we can be designing cities. I want to talk about a different way that we can design cities that I think is more consistent with the kinds of cities we have today, the kinds of societies we have today, and overall the kind of cities that we want to have in the future. Of course, all of us want more beautiful cities, more comfortable cities, more livable cities, better cities. And the profession of urban design in the past has not always been successful in providing those places. So hopefully this book provides some new ideas about how to do that. It's not a book about any specific city. It's not a history of cities. It's a sort of story about how we can design cities differently. So I'll start with 2 cities that most people interested in the design of cities know pretty well. Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, and Savannah, which is a small city in the United States. It's a very pretty, touristic city that many people visit if they go to the American South. These are famous cities. If you read a history of design of cities, you'll see that Savannah, Brasilia will appear in them. Also, Brasilia is famous because it was associated with famous architect, Oscar Niemeyer. What I want to point out is that I think there are actually very, very different types or orders of urban design. One type that's more associated with the urban design of the past, and the other type that I'm going to argue is more associated with the urban design of the future. Allow me to explain. Brasilia. Around 1960, Brazil decides it's going to build a new capital in the center of the country. The center is uninhabited. You need an all-new city, very exciting idea. Many countries have done this. Soviet Union built many new cities in Siberia. Australia built a new capital. Pakistan built a new capital. Building new cities was very popular at the time. How was it designed? Lucio Costa, the urban planner, designs Brasilia as a bird in flight. And this project becomes one of the most famous examples of modern architecture and modern urban design. This is Lucio Costa's sketch of Brasilia. It's very easy to understand. Some people say it resembles an airplane. People say it resembles a bird. Everybody agrees it symbolizes the future. It's the future of Brazil. Brazil will be a futuristic, powerful, technological nation. You can see that it's oriented along the lake. You can't interpret what all of these things are, but they're showing where the government center is going to be, the business area. These are all of the residential areas. It's a complicated project. You don't have to understand it entirely. This is the design of Brasilia in 1960, and the most amazing thing was they built it. Brasilia was built in the space of 4 years. In 4 years, people started moving in, and people continued to move in, and continued and continued and continued. And Brasilia grew and grew and grew. What happened? This is Brasilia on Google Earth. We can probably see Lucio Costa's plan. Unfortunately, the bird only had 2 wings. There weren't enough wings for all the other people, so they moved off the airplane onto the ground. And ironically, they moved toward the airport, very ironic. And the city expanded and expanded and expanded. It's much, much, much bigger than the original design of Brasilia. It will continue to grow. Today, this is called the historic district. It's the historic center of Brasilia. And in fact, it's not even the most popular place to live. People say it's not the center of Brasilia anymore. The center of Brasilia is out here. Now let's look at Savannah. Older city, much smaller. Built in 1733, part of a British settlement of North America. It's a simple, simple plan. It's a grid, streets and squares. This is the beginning of Savannah. You take a forest, remove it, you start building the city. 4 squares, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you see they're building houses. Now let's look at what happened to Savannah over time. This is one of the squares that exists. The city is still small. It's very beautiful. It's very popular with tourists. The idea was popular, and Savannah kept growing. As it grew, it copied the idea. Within 100 years, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12, 15 squares, up from 4. So Savannah grew by multiplying the original idea. So by 1815, the design idea is still intact, whereas Brasilia, 50 years later, the design idea is lost. This is the distinction that I make in the book between 2 kinds of design of cities. One that I call unitary, a single idea that can't be changed. It has to be finished to work. Second idea I call plural. It's an idea of multiple or many pieces. You need some of them, maybe you need more of them, but there's no perfect number, there's no final end. Once you build some, you already have a lot of the design successful. So Brasilia is designed like a work of art, or like a work of architecture. You don't build half a sculpture, you don't build half a building. You complete the building, you complete the city. It's the same idea, it must be complete. Savannah is plural. What is plural urbanism? A lot of the book explains different dimensions of plural urbanism. And what I'm going to spend most of my time talking about are 5 dimensions of plural urban design. These are these dimensions. They're very simple. Many people say, oh, we know this already. And many urban design scholars and historians, they've understood pieces of this idea. Of course, urban design is related to time. Of course, urban design is related to scale. What I say in the book is that this is actually a comprehensive, plural, or multiple quality of urban design that includes all of these attributes. And that urban design that accepts these plural qualities will be more successful. Let me start with plural scale. What I say is urban design is composed of multiple scales, from a small area, an area larger than the building, all the way up to a region. And I'll show you some images that explain this. This is a very small building, and it's Le Corbusier. This is his cabin in France. It's about as small as a building can be. It was only a few square meters. So architecture can only get so small. It can't get smaller than a person. This was the largest building of its time. It was built to hold rockets. In the 1960s, America sends rockets to the moon. You need a building to hold a rocket. So architecture has a maximum scale. The minimum and maximum scale of architecture is relatively fixed. It's not true of urban design. Here's a work of art, land art. Land art can be very, very large. But land art is not public. So this is not urban design. This is a large work of art. It doesn't change. It's not open to the public. It's fixed. but it can be quite large. Of course, works of art don't get much larger than this either, so art also has a fixed scale. Let's start with thinking about small scales of urban design. This is a famous photograph taken from inside the Seagram building, Mies van der Rohe Seagram building. Excellent modern building in New York. You're looking across the street to the Racket Club, an older historic building. We can debate or discuss the relationship between these two buildings. In a sense, this is a very small piece of urban design. The fact that the two buildings are related to each other is a small piece. They're sitting on a street, Park Avenue, that is a larger piece of urban design. And this introduces another interesting idea, that urban design grows and shrinks in scale. This is a map of a center of Barcelona. And if you ask, where's the urban design? I can provide many answers at many scales. Here, a plaza in front of the cathedral. Here, a square built in the 1930s. Here, a street that stretches from the ocean to the Barcelona grid, which is an even larger piece of urban design. Here, this large pedestrian space, or maybe here, the space in front of the market. It doesn't really matter. What we need to understand is that urban design has many scales, and those scales combine with each other in ways that are quite unique to the art of urban design. Here's a larger scale, the scale of a street. We all understand that streets can be urban design. Some streets are ugly, they're not urban design. This is Park Avenue. It's a large scale work of urban design. We're moving upward in scale, and I want to show you how large in scale urban design can become. Barcelona, the Barcelona grid, a very, very clever grid that does many intelligent things, including linking the center of the old city to another old city here, creating large boulevards that cross the city, creating public places at the intersections of those boulevards, accommodating public spaces, markets, universities, hospitals. This was created in the 1860s, and it's still being completed today. So the Barcelona grid is not finished. It's going to take a long time to be completed, which will get me to this idea of plural time in urban design. We saw Brasilia. It's a very large piece of urban design. And it's very tempting for an architect to say, this is perfection. This is perfect urban design, a huge city designed by me, and it's finished just like a building. It's very unusual. It's almost the only one. There are very few completely designed capital cities like this. This was the largest scale urban design I found. Maybe there are larger scales. This is the green belt of London. This idea here. The idea that the city stops and that around it is green space. It's a kind of urban design concept. Kiev also has a green belt. The question is, does this green belt stay the same or does it change? And that gets to the issue of time that I want to talk about next. Any urban design idea will contain works from multiple eras of time. Not necessarily true of a building. A building can be from one point in time. This is very common. So historic preservation says the building is old, building is new, young, old. Urban design can have no age. It's combined at many points in time. This is not a history of urban design to say urban design is old. Urban design has existed for thousands of years, such as the city in Mexico. Urban design has multiple relationships to time, and that has to do with its scale. So scale and time are combined. These plural qualities have a relationship, which is not surprising. This is a relatively small scale piece of urban design. It's called Place des Vosges. It's in Paris. Like an old building, it It's what I call an artifact. It's a piece of urban design that won't change. It's being preserved like you preserve a historic building. That as urban design gets larger, that becomes more difficult. Sometimes cities don't want to preserve their buildings entirely new, such as New York. New York allows this building, the new museum by Sana, to be constructed along this street in lower Manhattan. But look how wide this building is. It's the width of 2 older buildings, because someone took down 2 old buildings and put up 1 new one. So the scale of the building still has a relationship to time, even though it's not direct and it's a new building. This is what I call, it's an English word, palimpsest. It describes a medieval manuscript that you erased, and you write over it, and you erase it again, and over time you read many, many writings on this manuscript. A city is the same way. You read many, many, many periods of time in a single block of the city. This is Le Corbusier again, the capital of Chandigarh, India. Corbusier had the opportunity to design a capital city, so he designed a monumental civic center with a courthouse, office buildings, etc. He designed this to be eternal, unchanging, monumental. He was thinking of the Parthenon in Greece. He thought, this is my opportunity to build a Parthenon. The Parthenon is eternal. My capital is going to be eternal. Beyond my capital, you will see the hills of the city rising to the mountains of the Himalayas. But he forgot that the city around him is continuing to evolve. So what we have is a piece of the city that's frozen and a piece of the city that's changing. What we find in many urban design projects is some parts stay the same, other parts change rapidly. We can't control the influence of time on works of urban design. This is a piece of urban design that, in Boston, that we attempted to destroy. Every building you see was removed, but underground run metro lines, and they still show the shape of the former square. So this is to say that as urban design becomes larger, it becomes very, very hard to erase entirely. A building can be demolished and completely removed, but it's hard to remove urban design even if you remove all the buildings. Some piece of the historic urban design will always remain. Thus, urban design has a very profound and deep relationship to time. We can even stop the growth of cities. We can freeze them. It takes great political force to do that. This is Shanghai. Shanghai, China, 1972. In 1972, nothing had been built since 1949. Communist revolution, liberation in China, they call it, froze the city. All growth stops. Great social, political change, but no physical change. The same in Cuba. Americans love going to Havana. They see a city that is stopped in time because of the political revolution. Again, it's very unusual. Only under great pressure can cities be stopped from growing and changing. Some urban designers have realized this. They're afraid of change. They're scared of it. Change ruins urban design. If you alter a Mies van der Rohe building, it's no longer a Mies van der Rohe building. If you alter this promenade by Manuel de Sol Morales, it'll be destroyed. So he confined his work in scale. He said, I don't want to build anything too big, because it will change or it will be incomplete. And I'll talk more about those dangers later. So again, talking about this relationship between scale and time in urban design. Let me move on. I want to talk about people now. People and property. Urban design is different than a building. A building has an owner. Urban design has many owners. It seems very simple, but it's very profound when you start to think about the power that you have to create an urban design. So I'm going to talk about the United States. We love private property. Everybody should own a home in the United States, and our cities reflect that. This is the founding of a city in the United States. It's 1890 in Oklahoma. This land was controlled by native inhabitants, what we call the Indians. The United States says, you don't own it anymore. White people, Americans, can take it. And so they fired a gun. The people ran in and started settling territory. They founded a city in one day. What did they do? Let's see. Well, they did cities like this. Many American cities were founded in the United States in the 19th century. What was most important? Equality. Look at this city. So boring. It's just endless, endless, endless repeated blocks. Why? Because it's all land for sale. That's all the city is intended to do. Land for sale. All the same size. Except for here, maybe slightly smaller. Maybe they think this is the business district. American cities are intended to promote the growth of private property and to guarantee that everyone can make money. It's an opportunity. And our urban design reflects that. This is why American cities all look the same, and they're all very boring. And Americans are afraid to admit this. They think their cities are interesting. American cities are very boring. They're supposed to be. It's a boring city because everyone's the same. Everyone has the same opportunity. There's no space for monuments. There's no space for someone to be more important than the rest. If you're interested in political science, read Alexis de Tocqueville, writing about America. He loves democracy, and he says, American cities are the most uninteresting, insignificant places I've ever seen. People build little houses and they think it's a kingdom. He's laughing at them, but he also thinks it's fantastic because it means that everyone's the same. They're all Democrat. So, Oklahoma City, it's founded in one day. And 3 different people get out and they start laying out a city. So you have one here, you have one here, and you have one up here. And the streets don't exactly connect. You actually get 3 different city grids because when they looked with their compass, each one was a little wrong. They start fighting. Which one is the correct city? Nobody wins. They agree just to change the blocks. And today you just do this. They just slightly corrected the grids. That's all they could do because they didn't want anyone to lose their property. So plural property in the United States is incredibly important. This persists to this day. I think it's the only interesting thing about the urban design of Oklahoma City. It's interesting in that it talks about Americans' obsession with private property. Now, in my book, I talk about a second scholar. His name was Astolphe de Custine, and he read de Tocqueville. He said, this is a fantastic book. I don't want to write about another large, important country. I want to talk about its politics. I want to talk about its people. Do you know which city he chose? Russia. So he went to Russian Empire in 1840. I think it was Emperor Nicholas I. Dictatorship, absolute rule by the Tsar. He goes to St. Petersburg. What does he say? It's the opposite of de Tocqueville. Such a magnificent city. I've never seen one more beautiful. The whole city is a palace. It's the palace of one person. Everybody in the country is subject to a single person. He said, Russia, it's the greatest and the most terrifying country in the world. It has the greatest urban design I've ever seen, and it's the place where I don't want to live. His book is very unpopular, instantly forbidden in Russia. Today, no one reads it. De Tocqueville, very popular. Children in America, everyone in high school reads the book. Custine is forgotten. In my book, I talk about this continued sense of absolute power and the communist revolution that happened in Russia in 1917. Private property is forbidden. And as you know, in the 1920s, private owners were expropriated, punished, banished to Siberia, until by the 1930s, Moscow can be planned as a single project, common ownership. So the Moscow urban plan shows the significant power of the communist state. I've talked to my students about this. I say, what a great place to be an urban designer. The state has total power to build what you want, but it has total power over you. This did not get completely built, of course, because of money. Even Stalin didn't have the money to build everything he wanted, but he had the power. So this is why Soviet urban design, in a sense, is extremely interesting. In 2 days, we go to Zaporizhia. I know my students will be amazed by the magnificence of the urban design of this Ukrainian city. It's the case with many Ukrainian and many Russian cities. Magnificent urban design created by great power because there was no private property. Today, Russia privatized, but they still make decisions that reflect some property owners with more power than others. This is the extension of Moscow. It's announced the city will expand to the south. New central business district. Who are the property owners? We don't know. So property is still concentrated in the hands of a few. It might lead to more significant urban design, but it leads to an inequality of power. And that's a paradox or a danger in urban design. Can we have many people owning property and democracy and good urban design? That's what I want to talk about in my book. Let's talk about people. Urban design is big. It takes a lot of people to build it. This is a very beautiful block. It's a funny block. It's in Barcelona. My wife is Spanish, so I go to Spain to see my mother-in-law. And we stop in Barcelona because I get tired of being with my mother-in-law. So let's go to the city. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 houses. This one is by Gaudi. Casa Batlló. Very interesting house. This is called the block of discord, disagreement. And tourists look at it, they laugh. Look how different all the houses are. All of these owners creating these different buildings, all put together on a block. It looks very funny. In Barcelona, it's funny, but most of the time it's not funny. When different people build whatever they want, you get chaos. You don't get harmony. We can laugh at this because Barcelona is so harmonious. It's a very ordered city. So most of Barcelona has this calm beauty. They're different, but they're similar. The city has achieved a kind of harmony and difference. But usually, plural agents or multiple people building urban design leads to visual chaos, like in the United States. Americans spend a lot of time criticizing suburbs. It looks ugly. People are private actors are competing for advertisements. Las Vegas, Robert Venturi, Denise Scott Brown say, let's learn from Las Vegas. But you know what? There's nothing to learn. They have no urban design idea to come from Las Vegas because what's happening is already okay. It's like saying, let's do nothing, and whatever happens, we like it. It's good, right? Whatever, that's good, we like it. That's what they're trying to say. So there's no recommendation, there's no guidance for urban designers from this book, which is an interesting book, but it doesn't provide guidance. Rem Koolhaas has a different idea. He also sees that many people build the city, and it generates chaos. What's his response? He's an architect. He doesn't want to give up his power and say, I quit, I give up. He says, no, the architect can control this complexity. Put all the complexity inside the building. The building can solve the problems of the city. So he builds buildings like this and larger buildings. And he gives up on the rest of the city and says, it's chaos, Legos. Just leave it alone. There's no role for the architect here. Koolhaas and Denise Scott Brown Venturi are two very important architects that have thought about the role of multiple agents in shaping urban design. A third perspective that I also talk about is John Habraken, Dutch architect. John McRocken believes that housing is the center of someone's life, and everyone should be able to decide upon their own house. He's criticizing big, modern housing blocks, like those housing blocks that 90% of kids' population live in. They're hard to change. You don't have any power really to change what's happening. McRocken designs housing where residents can make changes to all of the outside and inside of the building. So these are architects that are looking at plural agency. Lastly, I want to talk about plural form. A building is a single object, but urban design is not an object. It's really a series of objects or spaces that have a kind of relationship. It's not only the objects or spaces, it's the relationship between them, and I call that plural form. I'll show you a couple of examples. Paris. This is the Rue de Rivoli. Paris is so beautiful, it seems like it's a single designed object. And maybe it is. Much of Paris seems like it's a single piece of urban design. It has a single form. London is the opposite. Less beautiful city, but it has its own order. This is one of the squares in London, Bloomsbury Square. If you go to London, you can walk from square to square. The squares have an order around the square, but in between them is a kind of chaos, much less beautiful. The squares are organized by developers, and in between is less design. It's fragmented. It doesn't have the order of Paris, but it's not displeasing. The slide is dark. It's a small house by Frank Lloyd Wright, the Cheney House in Oak Park, Illinois. Frank Lloyd Wright built about 35 houses in Oak Park. We might say, oh, this is like London. It's a piece of urban design. It's not. I call this an architectural assemblage. There's no relationship between the houses. It's kind of random. So just because there are multiple pieces of architecture in a single place by the same architect doesn't mean it's urban design. What I'm talking about is something different. And I'll show you a couple of examples in a second. I'm almost done with this piece of the presentation. Another famous example, Fumihiko Maki, group form, hillside terrace, Tokyo, Japan. Maki gets to build multiple pieces of architecture over time. But it's a single site. It's actually unitary urban design. It's a single property. It's a single designer. It doesn't possess plural qualities. It's just a large-scale work of architecture. And the Archipelago by Oswald Matthias Ungers and Rem Koolhaas from the 1970s. West Berlin, pieces of new architecture and radical architecture in West Berlin, but no relationship between them. They don't cohere into an overall composition. So I would say it's not urban design. In fact, we know that Koolhaas designs large monumental pieces of architecture, doesn't think about the urban context. This is a collection of large monumental pieces of architecture. Let me show you 3 projects. I'm skipping a couple of chapters in the book that go through additional built projects from the past and additional designers to talk about 3 projects that I project to deal with urban conditions that are very common today. What I want to argue is that urban designers, taking into account these different plural dimensions, property, time, scale, agents, and form, can generate urban design ideas for very, very diverse settings across the world. So what I'm proposing is an urban design that's applicable across the world to all urban environments. I believe these principles are true everywhere. So I give these projects simple names: island, grid, and periphery. They're not real. They're inspired by real places, but they're imaginary projects. Let's look at the island. Here are the problems. It's low density, it has no center. Development is uncontrolled. It's most of the United States. The solution, what I call green avenues. It's inspired by a student project I had about 10 years ago. Green avenues connecting one space to another. How many? Where? What's the size, scale? What are the buildings around them? It doesn't matter. I'll show you. The key is it provides access to water. So here we have an island. We have green space in the center. We have some growth. There's no real center. The island continues to grow. And what happens over time is these views that you have to the water become lost. They get locked. They become rarer and rarer and rarer. This is a problem faced by many American communities. So, what if we institute an idea of green islands? Conserve some open spaces, guaranteeing this kind of access. Then, as the city grows or the village grows, you build more green avenues until you have a relationship between the two. The green avenues preserve the view, and the rest of the island can grow as it did before. How many avenues? How big should they be? What if we don't get to build all of them? It doesn't matter. The point is that you have some. More is better, maybe, but you don't need too many, and you don't need, maybe you need more than one. So again, the exact number is not important. Imaginary views of what some of these avenues might look like. Again, I'm not designing the architecture here, I'm thinking of the urban concept. A three-dimensional view of the green avenues. Grid. This was inspired by a visit I made to a post-socialist city, I won't say which one, where developers were building whatever they wanted, wherever they wanted, in a historic city center. Tall buildings were rising next to older historic buildings in an uncontrolled way. People were unhappy about it. Historic center, post-socialist city, uncontrolled development. What do? This urban design concept organizes the placement of towers. It permits the growth of towers, but only in certain locations. And it requires that developers build additional amenities or positive public spaces near the towers that they build. So every time you build a tower, you solve a problem in the street somewhere. The streets are too wide, there's too much traffic. Here's a picture of towers being built anywhere they want. Now we start to organize the towers along major streets. And each time there's a major tower built, you create a couple of parks. Maybe you stop traffic on some streets. You create traffic islands, but you're creating a clarity in the structure of the city between the major streets, towers, and public benefits. And as the number of towers grows, also the benefits for the public grow. None of this is paid for by the city. It's all paid for by the developer. More. How many? It doesn't matter. The urban design concept can survive if one is built, if 100 are built. Some views. Lastly, a project that I call periphery. This is another common situation across the world. A poor country, rapidly growing population, exploding city. Think of Africa. All the cities are exploding with growth. What's the urban design idea? Acknowledge that you can't shape the entire city. Build a couple of major centers at the periphery. Just design the streets. Design the streets, let the rest fill in. So you organize the city framework, but accept that the rest of the growth is uncontrolled. The city grows. It will grow and grow and grow. If you create two new centers, then you begin to shape the city's growth in those centers. And the city starts to become organized. Now you're introducing elements of urban design into a city that previously had none. Maybe these centers will be at the bottom of hills, maybe will be at the top. Here you see at the top, at the bottom. So at major intersections, you find concentrations of growth. At hilltops, you find concentrations of growth. It's actually not unlike the historic development of Kiev, with churches at the tops of hills, commercial centers in the valleys. It's a common relationship that can be accelerated by urban design. Let me conclude with three principles. The book ends with three principles for urban designers to accept if they're to become plural urban designers instead of unitary urban designers. All of these qualities right now are represented as problems in urban design. They're embarrassing. Urban design studios don't talk about them. Architects don't like to think about them. It's kind of an uncomfortable reality, like saying, this is my mom, but she dresses badly, or I don't like her very much, but she's my mother. It's an if a building is incomplete, it's a disaster, right? We never want a building to be incomplete. Look at this one. Peter Eisenman, City of Culture in Galicia. I had the luck one day to meet Peter Eisenman on the street. Because my wife is Spanish, she said, "Tell him to finish my building. It's unfinished." Because the building is too large. It's too large to be completable. We all know many buildings that are too big, and we start to think it's never going to be finished. So in architecture, it's a problem. But plural urban design can always be unfinished because there's no final condition of urban design. Look at the boulevards of Paris. How many boulevards is Paris supposed to have? 5, 10, 20, 30? In fact, Paris's boulevards are incomplete. And they're also more than complete. In some areas there are more than they projected, some areas less. Paris was never conceived of as a single fixed piece of urban design. My last principle, fidelity. Urban design is inexact. You don't have the precision that you have in architecture, and you will never achieve it. So urban designers have to accept a larger degree of flexibility in design. Small-scale works of urban design can be built exactly as designed. Here's Alvarado sketch for Seinäjoki, Finland. Here's the finished site plan. Very lucky. Alvarado, powerful architect, he gets to build complex exactly as designed. It doesn't have to be that way. Plural urban design succeeds even when the architects are different and when buildings are radically different in form. This is a project I talk about in chapter 3 of the book called Twin Parks in the Bronx. Here we see two different projects. Project by Passanella, project by Polshek. Programmatically similar. Social housing. Location related. Material similar. Steel, brown brick construction. All part of a common master plan. Maybe one is here, one is here. But notice, these don't precisely resemble the finished buildings. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that the concept remains intact, and that the concept didn't require that the buildings be exactly as they were originally projected. Unlike in architecture, where a departure from the design leads to the building being ruined. In fact, Mies van der Rohe used to say, if a building isn't built exactly as I designed it, you can't call it a Mies van der Rohe building, take it out of the book. So there are actually some hidden Mies van der Rohe projects because someone builds stores on the ground floor and other changes like that. Going to wrap up. Unitary urban design is very common. It's how we think of urban design today. Historically, it's how we've been taught to create urban design. It's because urban design is descended from architecture and landscape architecture that we design urban design as a single fixed object. But cities are not single fixed objects. They're dynamic, they're moving. Urban design needs to be more like the city and less like the architecture that makes up the city. It's still an art, it's creative, it's very difficult, it's demanding. But if we accept the plural qualities of the city and the plural qualities of urban design, instead of rejecting them, we will have many more urban design opportunities rather than less. That's what my book is trying to argue, and I'll see if anyone decides to listen to me as people begin to read it. Ultimately, I want to argue as the world becomes more complicated and more democratic, as cities become bigger, messier, think of the cities of China. Unitary urban design is not possible there. Plural urban design, on the other hand, has some chances of success, and maybe it means that more cities can have urban design rather than less, the condition we have today. Thank you very much.